Local development in the urban space is going to be this morning's theme. So 16 minutes are allocated for every presenter, and we have a total of 90 minutes. So now I would like to invite the speakers to the floor. Le-Yin Zhang.
Call all of you, each of you, and then I will invite you here. Welcome. İkinci olarak,
as the second speaker, Yiğit Evren is kindly invited. Please take your seat. Third speaker, Regier, is invited, and Bülent Açıkgöz is the fourth speaker. So I will be reading your CVs when it is your time. So the first speaker is going to be Le-Yin Zhang. Her theme is local development strategies in the context of climate change, SDGs, and NOAA. So every speaker will speak about local development from different perspectives. So the first two speakers will give us a theoretical viewpoint on local development, and the last two speakers will be talking about the practice. So Le-Yin has worked in the local and urban development policies, and she's a professor in London, in Great Britain. So she has graduated from Beijing University in the field of geography, and then she has a PhD degree in planning and economic development and management of cities has been the expertise field of the speaker. So amongst the research fields, the role of the state in economic development and the climate change in developing countries and sustainable economic development and low carbon transmission and green financing have been the fields where she had researches on, and difficulties and strategies in the developing countries has been one of her books, and finance handbook for city leaders was another piece of book that she wrote for us. So during the preparations of Habitat 3, we have worked in urban economic development strategies. We worked with her.
Okay. Try. I didn't get. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I didn't get the translation, but I guess there was a full introduction for me. Thank you. So I'm not going to introduce myself again. It's a real honor to be here, and I feel it's also a very useful experience, because listening to the presentations yesterday, particularly in the session on Habitat 1, 2, 3, I found it's incredibly inspiring to realize that how long we have come from Habitat 1, yet perhaps how little we have been able to achieve. Now, saying that, I'm hesitating a little bit because I'm an optimist. I actually believe a lot we have achieved so far. But yet, when you put that against the background of the multiple challenges that cities face today, one gets a feeling that what we have achieved perhaps is just too limited. And therefore, we will have to think quite carefully about how we could change the tack of doing things, and therefore to be more effective. And this is the background why I'm here talking about strategies. Now, I know that we are living in an era when people seem to be not so interested in strategies, seems to be more interested in solutions, very specific solutions. This is not a criticism of the title or the subtitle of this forum, but I genuinely feel that nowadays perhaps we think the current, the immediate. We do not think enough about the longer-term future and about strategies that will enable us to get where we really want to. So how could I turn that to, yeah. Yeah, is it this? Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. I referred to the multiple challenges that cities face. I just want to be clear on what I actually referring to. So the challenges are incredibly numerous and demanding. So we have the SDGs, which has 17 goals and 169 indicators. Indicators are indication of what sort of dimensions one actually are looking at. And then there's the Paris Agreement goal, which actually means two, let's say, goals for 2 stages. The ultimate goal is for 2100, where we hope to limit the rise in the temperature of the Earth to 2 degrees or ideally 1.5 degrees. But in order to do so, we also need to have a secondary, let's say a stage post goal, which is for 2050. By that time, basically we need to achieve carbon neutral. There will got to be no net carbon emissions. Now that's a very high order from the vantage point of today. Thinking of, imagine a world where there will be 0 net emissions. That's something really challenging. And then we have the new urban agendas. We sometimes wonder what the new urban agenda really has delivered. And if you were in the session yesterday on the habitat 1, 2, 3, you will get different views from the 4 different speakers. But for me, I think it's a reconfirmation of our commitment to sustainable development. It thinks a bit more about what we can do to deliver it. I realized I needed to speak up. What I'm trying to say is that the 17 goals actually have a different meaning to me. So goal 11 is the urban goal. We want to achieve certain outcomes, inclusive, sustainable, etc. But it doesn't tell us how to get there. Whereas some other goals actually indicate how we can get there. So the other goals, for instance, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and 12 are all very relevant to cities because the majority of economic activities actually happens in cities. And the challenge of, And goal 13 is about climate change, but it simply says taking urgent action on climate change. And here, our failing so far is so clear. Basically, it's saying that what different nation states have voluntarily committed themselves through the self-determined national contribution in terms of mitigation is really only just scratching the surface of what we need to do. We need either to triple our efforts in terms of mitigation in order to keep to 2-degree limit, or we need actually to do it 5 times, 5-fold, increase our effort 5-fold. So that's really an indication of how much more effort we actually have to put in dealing with the climate change goal. And that's very significant to me, because it means that if we keep going the way we are going, we are not going to deliver any of this. We must find new ways. We must get more strategic in how we do it. Now, I have a simple proposition to make, which is about translating this global agenda into local agenda. And the simple proposition I have before I come to the last line is that if we seriously and actively pursue a low carbon transition agenda, a strategy, we actually will be able to deliver on multiple challenges that are in front of us. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to first of all recognize our own limitations. We have huge limitations. Am I already past, or there's still this minutes left, yes?
You still have time, only 5 minutes left. 5 minutes past, 10 more minutes.
Okay, so I already exceeded my limit. No. Okay, good. Sorry, I'm good. Yeah. Okay. So I think time is running out. Technology actually is advancing very, very rapidly, without many of us realizing. By the time majority of us wake up to the reality, we are already behind technology. A new regime of technology would have established by the time majority of actors really start to wake up and take action. And by that time, it will be too late for them, not in the sense actually dealing with climate change, because if technology matures, the cost of dealing climate change declines. But for me, as an economist, what really matters is not deliver on climate change, although I passionately committed to that, but also the strategic opportunities available it offers for us to strengthen our economy, to deliver on other SDGs, such as creating jobs, strengthening your industry, providing clean energy, and all that. These sort of opportunities really come at earlier stage of a technological cycle. So at this point, some of the earlier movers have already moved into position in this technological cycle, whereas others are still hesitating and debating about what we should do. Now that is some serious shortcoming in some of the key stakeholders that I see. Okay, so let me explain a little bit about the dynamic, why I'm talking about this. I think there are different perspectives about low carbon transition. Some of the perspectives you are probably quite familiar. So ecological modernization is one of these. Multi-level perspective is another. But what I am actually basing my analysis on is something called the techno-economic paradigm. It is relevant to us because it offers 2 key insights. One, on the one hand, it says that the direction of technological change is very much determined by the economic environment and the social political environment. So there's a selection process. What it means is that socially, if we are really committed, if we act upon actually our commitment. Therefore, for instance, willingness to pay for clean energy, the willingness to commit walking more, the willingness to travel less through things like, by using tools such as airplanes and so on, then that actually sends a signal to technology, to the direction where scientists will develop these technological solutions. So we should never underestimate this link, this very crucial link. On the other hand, it also said that how technology could actually affect the shape of our economy. So what that means is that if we are serious in developing and adopting new low-carbon technologies, we are opening new opportunities for our economy to develop, and indeed to develop faster, because in the early stage of technological change, the speed of advancing, the speed of improvement is faster, and the opportunities are more than later. Later, when things get standardized and so on, there will be less economic opportunities. So these are two very important insights to my mind, and it is on this I base my analysis. So key elements of the low-carbon transition strategy that I have in mind are relatively actually straightforward. The first thing is to lead, not to follow. Because actually at an early stage of technological cycle, there are a lot more opportunities. And if you get in earlier, there will be more economic benefits, technological headroom, first movers advantage, all these benefits actually to be had. And if you do not act now, if you follow, then later on, yes, clean energy will be available at a lower cost, but you have lost your opportunity actually developing your economy, developing your technological capability. That is a risk we should not take. We should definitely avoid doing that for the longer term. Okay. And I think because, as we saw earlier, that many of the challenges actually very long term. 2100, that is the framework we are working within in tackling climate change. So we should definitely plan for the long term rather than short term. And then we should actively exploit the linkages between economy and technological change, not just society and politics. Nowadays, when you think about climate change, it seems to me there's a lot of attention on society, on politics, but that is not enough. The politics will have, of course, politics is important because it mobilizes political will to take action. But ultimately, if you really want to get where we need to in terms of the multiple challenges, really you will have to act upon the linkages between economy, technology, society, and politics. And I feel that we also, very importantly, sometimes we hesitate in our action because we feel that there's not enough money to do things. But one thing I want to raise your awareness is the awakening of capital. What was most remarkable for me to realize was that in 2016, the governor of the Bank of England talked about the tragedy of horizon, when he talked about how we are failing to act, that is the financial sector, to act on addressing climate change. Now that speech was a landmark event in my mind. But since then, what has happened is extraordinary. So if you've been following the report from the recent UN Climate Action Summit, you will realize that the one of the same is about finance. And the amount of capital already put on this front is something more than 2 trillion globally. So their financial institutions actually have now waking up to their not only responsibility, but for their own financial security. They have to plan to deal with climate change on many, 3 different kind of fronts. But ultimately, they are willing to take action, and there are actually now finance available to support this sort of activities. And that is the reason I remain to be quite optimistic. I think I should end here. This is just an illustration of it. It's from a handbook I edited with Habitat, where we look at possibilities of using green bond, other kind of green financial instruments to support many different kinds of challenges. So I'm not going to dwell on it, and that is my conclusion. So I wish to emphasize that when we see all these challenges, especially things like climate change, we should not feel that, oh, these are daunting challenges. These are difficult to achieve. We actually should take a positive perspective on them and see in them real opportunities for delivering on meeting the challenges that are implied by SDGs, by the new urban agenda, etc. And the way to do so, I want to emphasize, is actually to work on the linkages between technology and the economy. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz.
Thank you very much, Le-Yin. After the session, at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A session of 15 minutes. Now we have Mr. Yiğit Evren. He graduated from Yıldız Technical University, Faculty of Architecture, Department of City and Regional Planning. You can find about him more on the website. He has quite an interesting presentation, and now I would like to give the floor to him.
A true privilege to talk in front of a very distinguished audience and speakers, from whom I do hope to get some valuable feedback at the end of my presentation. Before I start, I would like to thank Professor Gülden Erkut for providing me the opportunity to participate to this exciting event. Well, this is a co-authored research, as you can see from the slide, which I've been conducting together with my PhD student, Ezgi Akdoğan, since 2018. And it deals with resilience and focuses on the Turkish wine industry. Our presentation has 4 main parts. I will begin with a very short literature review and present our main theoretical argument. Then I will quickly explain our method, accompanied by a brief background. This will be followed by our ongoing case study on Thrace, and in the 4th part I will present some conclusions. Well, the focus of the regional economic debate or local economic debate since the beginning of the new millennium has significantly changed. During the last 2 decades of the past century, regional planners and economic geographers have mainly discussed the impacts of globalization on local development and focused on how capitalism works in different localities. In this context, we learned how regions differ from each other, or the ways in which they resemble one another. So the keywords, such as competitiveness, sustainability, have paved the way for the emergence of an intense debate on the region and regional development. However, the weakening of the global economy and the conditions of the risk-prone world we live in urged us to review our policies and methods. Influenced by the rise of the evolutionary economic geography, our focus has shifted, and we started to investigate how regions change rather than how they operate. The concepts like contextuality, path dependency, and contingency have entered into our language and becoming a source of inspiration for some of us to study the importance of actors, their actions, networks, and contexts in local development. In the meantime, how can I turn back? Yeah. In the meantime, a new buzzword has entered into our discourse, the notion of resilience, a term which is used as an analytical tool for describing how a city, a region, or an industry responds to shocks and disturbances. The growing popularity of the debate allowed us to discuss a long list of new concepts, such as resistance, robustness, or recoverability, etc. So the main idea here is to measure resistance and recovery by the help of V-shaped graphs showing regional economic growth paths. Predictably, the rise of resilience thinking in economic geography and planning has not been without its dissenters. In this context, Martin and Stanley, for instance, provide a very useful list of concerns relating to the use of resilience ideas in spatial socio-economic contexts. I'm not going to go in detail to this debate, but add one more concern to their list. Inspired by the leading scholars in the field of economic geography, we argue that the mainstream resilience literature neglects the macroeconomic behavior in its analysis, and this also true to some extent for a significant section of local development discourse. What we've been witnessing is a removal of real actors from the analyses and a growing tendency to view cities and regions as if they were the economic actors. But regions are not real actors, as rightly put by Bartelt and Blücher in 2003. They are socially constructed entities dependent on the particular economic, social, cultural, and political settings and realities under which people in firms and other organizations act and interact. Therefore, we need a more institutionally nuanced and actor-centered analysis. But of course, this doesn't mean totally rejecting the mainstream methods and understanding of resilience thinking. As I wholeheartedly agree with Martin and Stanley, the value of the idea of resilience is that it encourages us to recognize the potential impact that major shocks can play in the processes of uneven regional development, and to explore how regions, localities, and cities differ in reaction to shocks. In this context, their V-shaped diagram provides a very useful yardstick to examine the anatomy of resilience. Well, this is exactly what we did, actually, and our purpose was to include some real actors and their behavior into analysis, but without neglecting the tools of the mainstream resilience literature. Therefore, our departure point in this research was also a V-shaped diagram for the Turkish wine industry. Here you can see a line chart displaying the production trend of the national sector. This is an indexed version, and the industry since 2007 has been doing quite well, no problems, and seems to display the great recovery if we don't see the sharp decline in 2016, of course. But when we compare that with the trend of the fresh grape production that is the wine grapes production, we observe a surprising picture here, you can see. To some extent, the growth path of the industry's main raw material has been stable, and that was not something that we expected. And at this point, we asked ourselves, from where do all these wines come from? Interestingly, the picture gets even more complicated when we add the vineyard data. The total vineyard area in Turkey during the past 2 decades has been in the process of decline, the result of which pushed Turkey one step down in the global ranking. In 2004, Turkey was the 4th largest fresh grape producer, but in 2018, we have a ranking of the 5th. So this raises a second question, that is, what is going on at the vineyard? The story gets even more and more interesting if we consider the vineyard data of Thrace, which is Turkey's one of the most important regions in winemaking. And as you can see in the slide, the decline in Thrace is more significant in comparison to that of Turkey. At this point, we need to change our question again and ask whether this is a statistical illusion or Turkish winemakers have silently developed new skills to remain resilient while their grape growers have faced challenging times. Or is it something else? So this is in fact what we've been looking for in this research. So in order to do that, we employed a series of semi-structured interviews with local producers in Thrace, as well as the president of a local tourism association who played a leading role in the creation of the Thrace wine route. And that means that touching the real actors in the field. Further to this, we reviewed our other published material related to the region and wine making. Okay, let's focus on the wine story in Thrace then. Thrace is the European side of Turkey, comprising 3 provinces, Edirne, Kırklareli, and Tekirdağ, and it is in the Marmara region, of course. And the region is mainly specialized on agriculture, especially sunflower plantation and dairy production. The eastern sections of Thrace, however, has been under the pressure of urbanization and heavily industrialized. The map on this slide shows the distribution of winemakers to provinces to Turkey, and our national industry is quite small in comparison to world leaders like France, Australia, or Italy. As of January 2019, there are only 184 manufacturers, but the dominance of Thrace within the country is very significant. Around 30% of wineries are located here. Here we have a detailed map of winemaking in Thrace, and according to this, there's a significant clustering in Şarköy, Mürefte, Hoşköy line, in which 60% of all wineries in Thrace are located. The ancient name of this sub-region is Ganahora, surrounded by the sacred Mount Ganos and the Sea of Marmara. And this area has a long tradition in winemaking. The Mount Ganos was an important religious center maintained by Orthodox Christian monks, and wine was an embedded part of their local culture. Furthermore, the Yenikapı excavations for the Istanbul underground has revealed that Ganahora in Istanbul, actually some 8,000 years ago, had been connected via cargo ships carrying wine. That was interesting. Here are some old pictures from the 19th century. The wooden pier in Mürefte played a major role in the history of wine business, providing the main gateway for Thracian wines towards outside markets. And some pictures from today. This is Mount Ganos, and the view from its skirts that you can see actually the vineyards, the olive plantation, olive trees plantation, and the Marmara Sea. And the final picture, that's the Orthodox monastery up the hill within the vineyards and the wineries at the seaside. Okay, let's turn our attention back to our V-shaped path of wine production and try to seek some answers why this has been the case. We've jotted down a short chronological list of strategic events on the diagram: the establishment of the Tobacco and Alcohol Market Authority in 2002, and 2 years later the privatization of Tekel, were the two milestones in the recent history of the sector. Tekel literally means monopoly, was the Turkish tobacco and alcoholic beverages company, and it served as the most important actor in wine business. These two developments were followed by the enforcement of a series of new regulations, such as bringing bulk trade of wine, such as banning the bulk trade wine, and introducing a tough control mechanism over the industry to fight against its informal character. This explains the so-called boom of the year 2007. It was not actually part of a success story, but rather correcting the industry's false statistical representation. So our question eventually becomes what the impacts of all these issues on local actors in the field. First of all, the wine producers in the sector is not homogeneous. There's a pyramidal structure of winemakers, at the top end of which are large players with more than 2,000 tons of annual production. Numbering around 5, these firms are also the largest grape buyers in the country, and thus they dominate grape prices. At the absence of Tekel, the monopoly, which used to play a balancing role in the market, they have become the new monopoly in wine business, actually, seeking to maximize their profits. What is crucial here is that they somehow damage the traditional buyer-supplier relationships between local grape growers and small wineries in the region. The rest of the pyramid comprises a large number of small and medium-sized enterprises or wineries with average annual production of 370 tons a year. Yet again, they are not homogeneous in terms of their organization and resilience strategies. We can group them as wineries, wineries with vineyard, and wineries with vineyard and tourism facilities. So we call the Group C producers, the disadvantaged. These wineries mainly produce table wine, an average size of 550 tons, and especially after prohibition of bulk wine trade, this group have lost their previous competitive advantages and faced severe difficulties to adapt to changing conditions of the market. Learning wine bottling processes in particular required specialized skills and serious investment. Since most of them face severe debt management problems, the fundamental resilience mechanism for these firms is to avoid banderol procedures and tax evasion. The organizational features of Group A and B in trades are quite similar. Therefore, we decided to merge these two categories within a single group and name them the competitive elites. Firms in this type are the new boutique winemakers. They serve to the top end of the market with premium wines. And these wealthy family businesses enjoy taking risks, since the winemaking or wine business is not their primary source of income. Most of them are well educated and can reach outside markets very easily and seek help from foreign specialists to learn new production and marketing techniques. And not to mention that they have a very efficient way of using social media. Competitive elites came together and have established the trace wine route some 5 years ago, as you can see from this beautiful leaflet. The idea was to promote the industry in Thrace accompanied by tourism activities. Yet the route has received severe criticisms from local owners, local producers, since it was not designed in a democratic way and excludes other small producers in the region, most of which actually need mentorship. Okay, I'm aware that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just stop here and present my conclusions in 2 minutes. Our main argument in this presentation is the importance of employing an institutionally nuanced and actor-centered understanding of resilience and local economic development. We severely need it. The methods of the mainstream literature, especially those of the regional science and mainstream resilience literature, are very useful, very powerful, very handy, but bring a partial understanding of the issue if we neglect the story of real actors, their networks, and their changing context and how they respond to shocks. And as for the empirical work, talking to real actors from the sector has allowed us to understand the place-specific processes at work, different from the sector's V-shaped pattern of growth. We observed that the wine industry in Thrace has been threatened by the changing institutional conditions, and the gap between the producers, between the elites and disadvantaged producers, has been widening. So, thank you for your attention. Yep.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. Bir sonraki konu
Thank you. The next speaker is from Canada. He's working in Waterloo Municipality. So, this is graduate degree in geography and master's degree in regional planning, and planning policies and economic policies have been the areas where he worked. And with Lee and Rod, we have worked in the UN Urban Policy Development section, and Kitchener's story is very interesting, so I kindly asked him to talk about this. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Gülden. It is indeed a great honor to be here presenting in Istanbul, one of the great world cities for many, many millennia now. I am delighted to be able to tell our story. It's a story of a relatively small region west of Toronto, Canada. We have a two-tier municipality. I currently work for the region of Waterloo, which encompasses 3 cities, Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo. And the story essentially involves the city of Kitchener. And as I may run out of time later, I'm going to summarize my argument here. First of all, it is possible to build an innovation economy in a mid-sized city. And even if you are in competition or potentially collaboration with a major metropolitan area such as the city of Toronto, and our experience is that it requires a sense of urgency, investment in knowledge institutions, investment in transit infrastructure, support for entrepreneurship, collaboration among the economic stakeholders, openness to the world, and support for diversity, and a celebration of the city and urbanism. So, just to go, where's Waterloo? It's in Canada, in Ontario. It's about 100 kilometers from the city of Toronto, about 630 kilometers from the city of Montreal, and New York is 800 kilometers to the east. Chicago is approximately 750 kilometers to the southwest. And in terms of latitude, we're not that much further north than Istanbul. We're 43 degrees latitude, which is equivalent approximately to Varna, Bulgaria. So I'm not sure why that amounts to, why our climate is so much harsher than Istanbul's, but it's one of those mysterious bits of geography. Our region comprises of about 1,300 square kilometers, and it has 4 rural townships and 3 cities. And up until the early 1900s, it was primarily an urban place with relatively small concentrations of settlement. And particularly over the post-war period, post-World War II period, as the automobile became much more pervasive in the economic and social system, our region evolved into a profoundly suburban place. We're a very low density urban area. We have some of the highest car per person ownership patterns in Canada. And I can tell you without any shadow of a doubt that we are part of the problem of climate change. This pattern is one that we are working very diligently to deal with. And I just want to talk about the policy context briefly, starting with the formation of the University of Waterloo in 1957. It was established, the university was roughly equivalent to the Technical University of Istanbul in terms of its role in the regional economy. And it was established by business leaders in the rapid period of growth after the World War II, when they knew that they needed more technical expertise to support growth in the long run. So they formed a university to focus on engineering, on mathematics, and ultimately it evolved into Canada's top computer science school. And one of the underlying premises of the university was that it was designed to produce a labor force to support the growth of industry. And to do that, they encouraged students to participate in cooperative education, which meant that a student would take a little bit longer to complete their degree in engineering, for example, but by the time they finished, they would have up to 2 years of work experience in industry, solving real problems in the real world. So this resulted in a labor force that was well adapted to support the growth of the region. And the region flourished in the period following its establishment. But it flourished in this sprawling suburban way, and we ultimately decided that we needed to put a series of growth management tools in place that would allow us to concentrate growth in the center of the city and begin to build a much more compact and sustainable metropolitan area over the subsequent decades. And that's essentially the main policy thrust of the next 30 or 40 years. I would say that things went swimmingly from an economic development point of view, from a labor market point of view. We had a high-performing labor market leading right up until the early 2000s, when the forces of structural adjustment, deindustrialization that swept across central North America in the period of around between 2002 to 2006 really took over our economy. And we saw particularly decline in manufacturing employment, large manufacturers relocating to lower cost labor markets, some completely closing their doors. And we lost approximately 12,000 manufacturing jobs during that period. And that corresponded roughly with a dramatic increase in the value of the Canadian dollar against the United States dollar. The relationship there was that we were selling most of our manufactured goods into the United States. So it forced our city to ask the question, if not manufacturing, then what was the future of our economy? This, of course, was not unique to the Waterloo region. This was a phenomenon which played out right across central Canada and the Midwestern United States, what's known now as the Rust Belt, where factories were closing and moving for the better part of a decade and a half. And of course, we became very fundamentally concerned with the risks that this placed on our economy. At the beginning of this process, we saw 30% of our labor market employed in manufacturing, and as the Canadian dollar climbed against the US dollar, we became very concerned that it would fundamentally threaten our regional economy, leading to an erosion of our tax base and so on. So the community, it's very interesting that the community had a sense that it was at the precipice. It needed to do something. Its very foundations were at risk. So the city of Kitchener in particular took the unprecedented step of establishing an economic development investment fund to invest in new economy and creative industries foundations. It was valued at approximately $110 million, which was equivalent to the annual operating budget for the city. It was established or funded by an annual 1.25% increase in the property tax levy for 10 years, and it was focused on catalytic projects in the region, most notably the establishment of new education campuses for the University of Waterloo in downtown Kitchener, the investment in technology incubators, the development or investment in the remediation of contaminated lands, which were a legacy from our industrial history, and support for a rapid development or an extensive development of a light rail transit system to concentrate growth in the center of the urban region. And the bulk of these investments took place in an area which we now call the Innovation District in central Kitchener. It's at the intersection of our new light rail transit system and the intercity rail line that runs between Toronto and the Waterloo region. I have to say that in North America, and in particular in our case, rail infrastructure is grossly underdeveloped compared to European infrastructure, and so we're only starting this process now. But all of the investment was concentrated in this period, in this area. And this was the situation at the time. We had large parking lots which were the former site of tire factories and furniture factories and so on. And those parking lots we became determined to put back to work in the city. So in that particular case, the city gave a grant to the University of Waterloo for $30 million to start the development of the School of Pharmacy and a new health sciences campus in downtown Kitchener. We had abandoned factories, like this was a former shoe factory in downtown Kitchener, which was purchased by a developer out of the city of Toronto and converted into loft condominiums. At that time, our traditional real estate investors were very skeptical of the potential, so we were surprised and delighted by the experience. We invested in our streetscape, which resulted in more vitality in the downtown. We invested in a technology incubator in a former factory that resulted in startups. It attracted a very diverse young labor market from our universities and colleges to build technology companies. And we invested in our light rail transit system, which has just opened this year in June, and has resulted in dramatic investments in our downtown, which is increasing the density of our city quite significantly. Even companies like Google have built at the intersection of our transit infrastructure, which is in contrast to, for example, their locations in California, where there's very little in the way of transit to support it. It's analogous of Google's investment in London, UK, for example, at King's Cross Station. Google's now expanding again and will have soon 1,400 employees in downtown Kitchener. So the result of all of this activity has been about $3.1 billion in building permits for new high-density construction in the center of the transit system, and significant increases in tax assessment, that is the value of properties for tax revenue purposes. It's resulted in a shift, a fundamental shift in our built residential stock from a very low density form to a much higher density building stock. And it's resulted in an increase, quite a dramatic increase in employment in professional and scientific and technical services in the Waterloo region, which has resulted in increased regional resilience in our labor market and has driven down unemployment in the region from a peak of approximately almost 10% in the recent financial crisis to approximately 5% at the present time. And in this process, the region has been positioned to collaborate with the larger Toronto metropolitan area as one of the most dynamic technology clusters in North America, competing now with Silicon Valley in terms of the number of jobs that are being created, and we're moving up in terms of the amount of capital that's being mobilized to support growth in technology companies. So just briefly to summarize again, what was our experience? Well, we found that it was necessary to commit ourselves fully to building a city that energizes creative people. It is the brain power and creative energy of individuals and groups that will mobilize your economy. And the ingredients for that for us was a vision and a commitment and the autonomy to act as regional and local governments, as well as strong partnerships with our stakeholders, our potential for collaboration with particularly the private sector, with our educational partners, and with youth. It was extremely important that youth felt like this was a city that they wanted to be in. We needed a willingness to invest, to take risks as councils, and I would say that through this entire process, we didn't lose a single councillor to an election process. A number of them retired over the years, but they weren't voted out of office, which I think is a testament to the strength of the community consensus on our strategy. And you need the raw materials for the creative economy. You need to have competitive educational institutions, research institutions, and a spirit of entrepreneurship. We needed to invest in infrastructure to support intensification. We could not build a more compact city without higher order transit services, and we needed time. It took us a decade to start to realize the outcomes of the strategy, and it's now clearly one that's fully engaged and reaping, and the region as a whole is reaping results. So thank you very much.
Teşekkürler. Tam zamanından önce de bitir.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for using time efficiently. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Bülent Açıkgöz, our last speaker from UNDP, Public Sector Policies and Services Portfolio Manager. He is a graduate of Middle East Technical University, Faculty of Architecture, Department of Urban and Regional Planning. Then he received his first master's degree in economics, and then his second master's degree in European Union Regional Development Policies from the University of Bremen. Since 2006, he is serving in managerial and technical positions in various programs and projects within the scope of the United Nations Development Program in the fields of inclusive and sustainable growth. So we are giving the floor to Mr. Açıkgöz. Thank you very much, Ms. Chair. I would like to speak in Turkish if it is possible. Ms. Aslı talked about it. I will be talking on behalf of the UNDP, the Development Program of the United Nations. So specific to the UNDP, in terms of regional development, I would like to talk about inclusiveness and sustainable growth. But first of all, we need to understand what is the issue of sustainable growth and regional growth in Turkey. The most important issue is having substantial differences of regional development between regions, between cities, and between cities and rural areas, pre-urban areas. There are differences in development. For Turkey, the most important observation is the difference between the east and the west, and also the difference between coastal areas and landlocked areas. So the regional development is the policy of policies at UNDP, because the regional development, rural development, industry, innovation, technology, human resources, lots of different areas are included in regional development. That's why we need to look at this issue in an integrated way. It's a complicated issue. That's why different institutions, different actors play a major role in this area. Different ministries, different actors. In terms of hierarchy, there are different programs and projects. So I would like to talk about the UNDP very briefly, the development program of the United Nations. At more than 170 countries, we are trying to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth. That's why we are offering support to public, private sectors, and NGOs. So in Turkey, at the office, we have 3 portfolios: inclusive sustainable growth portfolio, where we see the practice of regional development. Climate change and environment is a critical area. We have lots of projects, and inclusive democratic governance. In terms of governance, we have different activities, and also we need to include the private sector and gender issue. That's why in all kinds of projects and programs we are trying to include this aspect. So local socioeconomic development in 3 main areas we are operating. One is the regional development and competitiveness. I won't go into details. Urbanization and urban policy planning, and community-based socioeconomic empowerment, especially focusing on the disadvantaged groups. We have more than 27 local development programs and projects in Turkey. So we have lots of important professors, but in terms of regional development, now we are quite we have a different perspective compared to the traditional model. In the traditional model, the government is the lead for development, but now we are focusing on a multidisciplinary and multi-institutional concept. So we try to include the private sector, public institutions, and academia. Those are the main actors. So they are not in a hierarchy. They should interact with one another, and we should be equal to all those actors. Development is a concept that requires integrated approach. So we need to focus on the environment as well, our public policies and economic growth. So there is productivity, there is innovation. So we're trying to optimize all those areas, and we try to focus on each and every one of them to be able to ensure regional growth and development. So in the Q&A session, I can go into technical details, but we have an experience of 30 to 35 years at UNDP. So in Urfa province of Turkey, Urfa, by the way, is a socioeconomically lagging behind province in Turkey. And in this slide, you see a vision set for the province of Urfa, and all actors, public sector, private sector, academia, civil society, are there with a common goal. This is the critical concept for us. In local level, you need to go decentralized, and you need to implement the common vision. It is also important to say that the public sector works as a facilitator. The academia is producing the knowledge and information in parallel to the needs of the private sector. And as you can see, the institutions are there, and in Urfa, they are the actors of the industrial transformation. They are supporting the transformation. Another lesson we have learned, the inclusion of the private sector is crucial at the UNDP. It has a very important tool program for tourism industry, and this initiative is supported by the private sector in Turkey. In different cities at the local level, we create tourism destinations. We offer grants to actors, we offer mentorship. So the private sector is quite important, because in local development, private sector is included as a main stakeholder. So their business models, market growth strategies, and all activities include the regional development perspective. So it is not only a donation, it means changing the way of doing business. So there is something critical, the interaction between different scales. From the United Kingdom, our speaker said this, the SDGs are very important. We need to look at the national priorities, and we need to take into account the local needs. That's why we always look at those local needs. We evaluate national priorities, and then we look at the SDGs, and we try to come up with a relevant project. And then a local initiative can have a global impact. We can add a drop in the big ocean. So national priorities, we have national development plans, we have the 11th national development plan, there are sectoral development plans. They're quite important, but we have to think about we have to question those plans as well. So in the design of those plans, we need to contribute also in larger scale plans. So when we look at the local dynamics, we see local values and assets and local needs. Local values should be used for local development. I have talked about this. In terms of local development, the structural transformation is needed. That's why we have an integrated perspective. SDGs, we see three categories there. One is social development, the other one is economic development, and environmental development and cooperation. So in a balanced way, we try to mix all those components and we try to design local development strategies. Competitiveness is crucial, and there are environmental issues, governance, innovation. So we try to keep all those components in a balance. So we try to go for inclusive sustainable growth, but there's the climate change and environment component, and also the gender equality and inclusive democratic governance. It is critical. For UNDP Turkey, for the Southeast Anatolia region, well, we focused on this region together with relevant institutions. We take this region as a lab. Since 90s, we have implemented different projects and programs, competitiveness and efficient usage of renewable energy, or in order to strengthen the women, we have implemented projects. You need to set the vision properly, because you cannot opt for the medium level success. You need to come up with long-term visions. That's why at the local development point, gender equality, social gender equality is critical and indispensable. And sustainable development goals, we try to link each and every action to those SDGs. In terms of indicators and goals, we try to link to them. So society-based development criteria is essential for us. So together with the society, we are trying to achieve development, not in spite of the society. So the local institutions and people should become a part of the process. Strategic alliances are crucial. So in the UN system, there are some partnership programs for rural development. For example, the FAO is in collaboration with the UN so that the impact can be bigger. Or with ILO, there are different vocational training programs to increase the impact. With international financial institutions, we have to cooperate, because when we talk about rural development, EBRD, IBRD, they are quite important in terms of funds. In Turkey, development agencies are critical actors. That's why we need to cooperate with those agencies and organizations. This is indispensable. On the right hand side, you can see the leaflet, and we have a representative of this office here, so we can now design financial support programs together with different institutions. So the development finance is critical in regional development. Another lesson we have learned in not being paralyzed in analysis. Analysis is important. We scan the literature, we look at the baseline, we look at the field, but at the end of the day, we spend like 80% of our resources and no resources for the implementation. In 30 years, we have learned that in local development, we cannot spend more than 15% of resources for analysis, because the rest, 85%, is needed for the implementation and for scaling out the program and for follow-up. So indicators and baseline are critical. We have listened to this as well. There are too many birds, but we have only 2 stones, so we have to focus on what we would like to achieve mostly. Indicators and baselines should be determined specifically. another important issue. We go local, but we need to contribute in the policy frameworks as well. We need to become a part of the decision-making process as well. That's how we position ourselves. You can see here as well in Turkey, in terms of productivity, if there is an initiative, then we have to offer this to ministries so that we can create a pool and we can change the legislation and policy making processes accordingly. Another issue, we are collaborating with different institutions and agencies like public-private partnerships and the civil society. We have to contribute in those institutions as well. That's why we have different training programs, networking activities, different tools for clustering, for example, cluster analysis, directives and toolkits. We share knowledge products. We try to boost the capacity of relevant institutions. So, a technical team can be employed, but afterwards you cannot leave. This is a learning process. That's why we try to increase the capacity of relevant partners. That's why we need training programs. And in local development, at the background, you have a context, but you have to collaborate with different regions as well. That's why, as far as possible, spatial development is also included in our agenda. That's why we collaborate with different provinces, with different regions. We try to match different regions together so that they can exchange expertise and experience. We need to help also with policy making processes. That's why we need to focus on systems. For example, there is a vocational training center. You can see the center. It is in Gaziantep. So when we try to come up with a strategy for the province, we need to support the ecosystem with those training centers as well. Otherwise, you cannot contribute in the big picture. Also, piloting for replication and scalability is crucial. You need to roll out the program in different regions as well. The impact created is crucial. You need to be able to replicate the efforts in different regions. In Hatay province, a waste management system can be implemented in Kilis in Gaziantep. We can do the replication, or in terms of efficient usage of renewable resources. For example, a solar irrigation system is transferred from Konya to another province. This is the last slide. Local development initiatives, like in each and every project, follow-up and monitoring is quite important. So when you design the program, you need to design the impact assessment and monitoring and evaluation as well. The impact assessment, after conducting the impact assessment, you can measure the impact you have created or you couldn't create. Success stories, failure stories should be studied so that you can be better prepared for the future. Thank you, and your questions are more than welcome.
Online olarak bir nerede o ekran var? Teknik arkadaşlardan birisi. Sorularınızı yazıla iletebiliyorsunuz o application indirdiyseniz. Sistem.
Please kindly speak to the microphone for translation. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, certainly we're very concerned with the implications of climate change strategy and economic development and the evolution of our built form as a region. I think there is a consensus in our community that we need to continue to stimulate and support innovation in this regard. I would say that in terms of the circular economy, we are working very hard to try and understand ways of building a more sustainable urban system, reducing our waste stream and resource utilization. But we are some distance from achieving sustainability in this regard. It's going to require a concerted effort for some time to come. And I think at the moment we are in a bit of a challenging situation in terms of our economic development institutions. There's been, the provincial government is working hard to deal with its structural deficit, and so we are seeing some of our economic development agencies under stress right now. So this is a bit of a critical period of time for us as a region. It's not clear how much of our infrastructure, our organizational infrastructure, will be able to sustain to support entrepreneurship in particular in the long run. But there's no doubt that there is a determination in the community to carry on and to continue to work together to invent new ways. Our community was the home of the company BlackBerry, and when they collapsed, they shed perhaps 7,000 or 8,000 jobs into our labor force, which stimulated the growth of technology startups. So we are looking to continuously reinvent our economy.
The moderator needs to use microphone for translation. The moderator needs to use microphone.
How you can give less damage to the local values.
Local values.
And long
Yes.
term and local values and local
Yes.
qualities and so on.
Yes. Yeah. That's a very interesting question.
Çok enteresan bir soru. Bir zaman önce
And from organization based in this region, I do not have a ready answer for it. But I feel that culture actually is a very important attribute in how we shape our economy. So the way we pursue any enterprise is very much actually related to values, culture. That's what I was referring to earlier when I said we need to explore the relationship between economy and society, because society is where values lie. So for instance, I know in the case of China, I give you an example of the case of China, okay? So in the Chinese culture, there's a great appreciation of natural beauty. And the government actually used this to push for the low carbon transition, because they argue that a beautiful country has to have a beautiful environment. And it argues that the president actually argued, saying that green hill and clear water is asset. And this concept, which is very much embedded in the Chinese culture, now is being used as one of the most powerful weapons actually to advocate for more sustainable development pattern. Yeah, so I do not think these two actually are contradictory. It is, sometimes you wonder, I mean, there's a strategic issue here, how you frame the thing. But of course, the frame has to be not really artificial. You really got to mean it. But then actually, once you succeed in doing that, you generate enormous dynamism and motivation for doing what really matters.
Thank you. The third question.
She is inaudible, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the question. Well, thank you very much for the question. Actually, in terms of involving women into the local decision-making processes, we are trying to put forward a program-based approach. So first of all, there are some institutions that we are collaborating with, and their perception, their approach, and their attempt to involve women are trying to be developed right now. This is how we start doing things with them. Actually, this is not Urfa experience. This is a kind of an experience that is emanating from the Southeast Anatolia region. So in terms of creating employment at the local level, we have conducted vocational training courses, primarily focusing on women. In terms of professional qualifications, we did not expect women to cover a great distance, and we have multi-purpose community centers. This was a note for the translators. So we have tried to teach them some courses, handcraft courses, so that they would be able to get involved into the labor market. So for the university graduates who have different capabilities and qualifications for different target groups, we try to come together with the private enterprises. For example, we have provided financial support to the SMEs in such a way to expand their market share so that they would be able to generate employment for the university graduates. Maybe I cannot share the figures with you, but we have achieved a statistically significant improvement in the region. Inaudible. Thank you very much. The gap amongst the actors and this alienization process should be left aside, because when we were speaking with this elite group, the competitor group, actually we've noticed the fact that they were in need of mentorship, and they confessed that they were left outside the route, the roadmap. They don't want to share the profits with them. Actually, those companies, when they want to establish a joint venture, they wanted to be a part of it. So a disadvantaged group was supposed to collect the waste from the wine factories. They were supposed to dispose those wastes. So they alienated some actors, but when it's their time, they wanted to be a part of the process. So when it comes to wine production, we wanted to bring things to a more democratic sphere. So we've tried to make them understand that nobody should monopolize the market, including the producer, the bottler, etc. So we wanted to establish this democratic structure. So maybe that kind of precaution should be taken for all the players of the wine industry. They have made their evaluations from the perspective of climate changes. So Yiğit Eren has given examples from a selected sector in Turkey in such a way to show how the traditional business methods have been evolved into more revolutionized versions. So also the smart cities and the investments on the individuals have been emphasized by Rod. So he has kindly explained a success story. Maybe he has not referred to that, but he said that there's this, second area. It is their city, which is the competitor of Silicon Valley. So this is what he has kindly shared with us for the first time. And especially UNDP Turkey, what UNDP Turkey can do. There are lots of projects that UNDP Turkey does for the less developed regions. And amongst these modules, what kind of relationships are there? So this question was answered by Bülent. So we're expecting you to join us in the next session, which is themed as the localization of the global values. Thank you very much for joining us since the very early hours of the morning.